Now, make no mistake, there is most certainly an epidemic of loneliness going on in the world right now. And it's been there for quite some time. But it's not the sort of loneliness that I believe people are confused about having. There's a lot of confusion, I think, especially in the youthful population, about the nature of loneliness, which is, of course, distinct from being alone. And there is overlap, obviously. But I think increasingly I've been observing that a lot of the young people in particular, especially the young men, think that the way to, quote unquote, fix the problem of loneliness is to go down the traditional route of pining away for relationships. And one of the ways this manifests, of course, in different forms of social media, and in particular things like OnlyFans, which has been fairly recent, as I've mentioned in the past, an alternative way of getting, quote-unquote, intimacy, paying for somebody to pay attention to you in a way that's distinct from pornography. Pornography is always about just, let's be honest, busting a nut, going in there, getting the job done. What OnlyFans does, pornographic though it might be, is somehow distinct from the phenomenon of pornography. Whatever sexual elements might be there, it is above all emotional pornography. But this is very telling, because the fact that so many people, especially young people these days, are turning to these mediums to remedy themselves of a feeling tells us that the solution to these issues cannot be found in what's currently on offer, which is an ever-widening, ever-growing partaking of social media and the many different things that emerge from that. Now, loneliness is in part a state of mind, which is to say you can modulate it, but I don't think it's entirely that. Some of it's just born quite organically of our neurochemistry. But I think what we've been trying to do, especially in recent years, is overascribe loneliness to the state of being alone, which is to say if you're alone, you're lonely. The two are not necessarily congruent. They can be, which is to say, of course, you can be lonely and you can be alone, and you can be alone and not lonely. There's overlap, but there needn't be. But there's this push that I've noticed for years. It's always been there, of course. Nobody, quote-unquote, wants to be alone. Nobody, quote-unquote, wants to die alone. Nobody wants to be alone, because the implication there is that if you're alone, you're lonely. Now, I have the image of the late, great Robin Williams up there for a reason. His now famous, infamous quote that just because you surround yourself with people doesn't mean you're not going to be lonely. Having sheer numbers around you, about you, does not ensure that you won't feel lonely. And there are a lot of complicated reasons for this. Robin Williams, in his case, he was suffering from major depression. He also had a variety of Parkinson's disease, which the public only found out about later. There were many contributing factors to that. I'm not saying that he did what he did because he was quote-unquote lonely. He had a lot of obstacles towards the end of his life. But that observation does stand. We're not freed from loneliness simply by dwelling in crowds, simply by standing about. And more importantly, the new crowd that I have observed is the best use of the internet to alleviate symptoms that cannot be remedied by the internet. It reminds me of some bygone era when television was the thing, where people would just have the television in the background as noise to simulate people, to simulate the feeling that somebody's there. And I'm not saying it's not important to have people around, but one thing that nobody ever talks about these days is quality. Quality over quantity. And let's be honest, some things in life are quantifiably just better. It's better to have a lot of money than too little of it. There's no such thing as quality money per se. But when it comes to most human matters, quality is a factor that always needs to be taken into account. You look at all of these social media gadflies and personalities, and I don't know, I'm not inside their heads, but I think it's very questionable whether or not they are internally not feeling what everyone else typically feels. And so in this sense, we've done our best as human apes to shield ourselves from consequential feelings and thoughts we might have by immersing ourselves ever more deeply in social media, in new formats like OnlyFans, which I mentioned prior, in anything that will effectively scare away the specter of having to confront oneself with one's inner feelings, thoughts, and emotions, and specifically the feeling of loneliness. I think we all feel that sometimes. But one thing I've learned over the years, having dwelt in crowds and also having retreated from crowds, and in this late stage of my life, much more in a state of retreat and avoidance than I was ever before, is the fundamental difference, in as much as occasional bouts of loneliness might occur, and they're limited and minimal the older I get, is that the fundamental distinction between when I was a much more social person versus now is that, as Robin Williams pointed out, there's no pretense that I'm anything other than on my own or alone. And when you're surrounding yourself with people, when you're spending all your time on social media, on internet interactions, and I do this too to some degree, it's very easy to lose the sense of reality that you're currently occupying, which is something a lot of people don't want to confront. We use these new forms of technology to shield ourselves from unpleasant thoughts and unpleasant feelings. Not everyone does, and sometimes this results in things like fentanyl overdose or what have you. But if there are any young guys out there in particular listening to me, take some time out of the day and just think about the reality of your situation. And you might come to the conclusion that despite all the distractions that you're offering to yourself, it's not actually remedying very much of anything. And the hard truth is, when I talk about quality people over quantity, there's no magic formula there. It's just dumb luck, really, like so many things, like virtually everything in life. You can't go out and select for people the way you can select for a job. Job requirements might be very specific. You may or may not meet them. That's distinct from people not only that you're going to get along with throughout your life, but people that you can rely on, people who might have your back, people whose back you want to have. These are things that are born of experience and a sense of connectedness with other human beings that you can't really advertise for. And I think this goes back to the original point. People are increasingly desperate for a sense of connectedness to ward off the loneliness in part, but also because it's so rare these days. Because all we do is flit from one platform to the next. We don't really spend much time thinking about how we interact with people, our friends, why they matter. Because we're stuck in a trap, and that trap is the loneliness of crowds. In a sense, of course, you're not lonely in crowds because you're being buffeted back and forth as if by the wind. You don't have time to think, and sometimes you don't have time to breathe. I'm sure that'll allow you to not think about the specifics of your situation. But ultimately, what I think all of us need to do, and especially the younger generation, they need to take a step back and realize, in as much as they feel like they're lonely or in a situation like that, they might very well be, but the proposed solutions are no solutions at all. And if anything, it just amplifies it, flitting from one distraction to the next in the vain hope that just maybe, if you do it long enough, you'll be able to ward off the specter of your fears in perpetuity until you drop dead. Now, I'm not saying that's an active thought on these people's parts, but It's almost certainly what's going on. We're all alone, ultimately. We're human minds cut off from other human minds, oftentimes desperate in search of some kind of connection. But that realization is powerful in itself. It allows you to mitigate some of the worst of the human condition. Not always, because we're all humans at the end of the day, all too human, but frequently. But you can only have that realization if you understand what the human condition is, which is just that mind that is cut off from every other mind, desperately looking for other minds to connect with, and always failing. But that lesson is becoming increasingly difficult to learn as we all fill our ears with the din of the internet and social media, and fill our eyes with the dazzling colors of every new web page we open up and every new site we check out. The starting point of all this, and perhaps the final destination, is that realization that wherever you are, whoever you are alone with your thoughts. And whilst you might try to reach out to other people, that realization can be powerful in dealing with the modularity of what we call loneliness. Yes, we all feel lonely at times, but how lonely you feel is partly mediated by a realization of what the human condition is. And then all the noise and flirtation with the rest of the world won't change anything about that. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. As always, please leave a like. Hit the subscribe button if you've not yet done so. Share the video, much appreciated. And as always, may the gods watch over you. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Enjoy your forthcoming weekend. Take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.